coming up.
Why did you think personally that it was okay for you to take on a job with a company, with an organization that was doing millions of dollars of business with NRStor, which you own?
Did you declare your conflict with respect to the SDTC during any of those conversations with Minister Baines before you filed your application, yes or no?
Sharon, here's the situation we have. The SDTC board could approve funding for a company on Monday, and then on Thursday, board members could buy or sell shares in that very same company. Do you know what that is? It's insider trading, isn't it?
Would you like to finish answering the question?
No, I think it's not necessary. I think I have tried to establish.
She's admitted her guilt.
Did the minister at any point note why specifically you were being encouraged?
There is a clear link between your efforts to get money for the failed Vercheron Center, get that so that they could give money to a company you had a financial interest in. That's a direct conflict of interest, and it's personal benefit by you, which is what the minister set up when he appointed you and knew and was warned that you had conflicts of interest.
This Guy's Garage. Like and subscribe.
As an individual, Annette Verschuren, an officer of the Order of Canada. Welcome, Ms. Verschuren. It's nice to have you here today. Verschuren, I have a point of order. Yes, Mr. Brock.
A couple of issues, Chair. I noticed that during the audio check for Ms. Verschuren, there were a number of people in the room, the same room that she is in, and I'd like to have some clarification if they're still in the room and who those people are, and whether or not they'll be communicating with her during her testimony.
Yes, sorry about that. I just conferred with the clerk. Those are questions I'll allow you to pose during the questioning, Mr. Brock. I know that's been done before during question. I'll hear a point of order if you have further evidence. I should consider.
I'm happy to do that, Chair. The second point of order that I had, or the second aspect of the first point of order, is that given the nature of the testimony, I'd be seeking unanimous consent to have the witness either sworn or affirmed to tell the truth.
All right. I'm going to confer with the clerk on that. Just 1 second, Mr. Brock. I'll come back to you. So, Mr. Brock, your request seeking UC is for the witness to either be sworn in or affirmed in. Affirmed to tell the truth. This requires all member consent. Do I have consent for the clerk and I to put this into effect? Oui, Monsieur Drouin.
Mr. Chair, I obviously I've sat on committees for 9 years now, and I know Mr. Brock is not fairly new, but hasn't been here for 9 years. I don't object to witnesses obviously telling the truth, but normally it's the normal practice for witnesses and the expectations that they would tell the truth, and there are other tools that we can use if we believe that members are not telling the truth. And I would also say that as we opine, as has been known as this committee, that members of Parliament also tell the truth in this committee. And I'd say we all sworn in to tell the truth. And so I certainly don't have an issue, but I would also ask the same of Mr. Brock, as he will opine on his questioning, to tell the truth as well.
Thank you.
Same point of order.
Well, sure. I was going to say that is noted, Mr. Duran. I did not hear an objection from Mr. Duran. I'm still going to seek for UC on that, but go ahead, Mr. Brock.
MP Brock and any other MP at this committee are not witnesses. We are members who are duly sworn to represent our particular ridings. We are on this committee to ask witnesses questions. His analogy would be akin to me going back to my old life and having a judge interrupt me in the middle of an examination in chief or a cross-examination and say, Mr. Brock, you need to be sworn in to tell the truth in the form of how you're going to pose the question. That is a ridiculous assessment by Monsieur Drouin, and either we had unanimous consent or not. Clearly, by his intervention, I think we don't have unanimous consent.
No,
but I'd like to hear that from
Mr.
you.
Brock, no, that's not what I heard. I'm going to call the question in a second here. In fact, I heard quite the opposite from Mr. Drouin, but I'm going to make sure it's clear here in case I heard differently than you, Mr. Brock. I will say to the same thing I said to Mr. Drouin, your point is noted. I am seeking unanimous consent for the witness to be sworn and or affirmed to tell the truth. Do I have that agreement from all members? Any dissent?
I, Annette Verschuren, do solemnly, sincerely, and truly affirm and declare that the evidence I shall give on this examination shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Mr. Perkins, you have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Vercheron, for appearing again. Could I start by asking, earlier it appeared that there were two people in the room with you. Could you please share with the committee their names and what their roles are?
There's no one in the room with me now.
They're not there now. Okay.
No.
Thank you. So I would like to begin with some of your previous testimony in relation to questions I asked you. I asked you in your appointment process how it came about. I asked you if you had applied. You answered the question in committee, and then you sent a lawyer letter a week later. But the lawyer letter didn't really clarify things from the perspective I have. So you said, Ms. Vercheron, that you had never applied for any job in your life, including this one, and that Minister Baines had called you twice to ask you to do it. That's what you testified last time. Is that still true?
In my note, I clarified to the committee that I was approached. And
about your note, sorry, Ms. Verschuren, I didn't ask you about your note. I'll come to that, please.
I was approached to put my name forward for consideration, yes. And after a period of reflection, I decided to fill out the necessary documents and submit my application.
I think that is the two pieces that I think we're missing, because in Minister Baines' testimony and in the testimony of the head of the appointments for the Privy Council office, the Prime Minister's personal department, they said no one was contacted that hadn't applied first, but clearly they had contacted you before you applied, is what you just testified.
Mr. Chair, during, I think the summer or the spring, there were a couple of occasions where I would have been at a conference or, with the minister. And I think we discussed it at that stage.
That he phoned you, that it wasn't at a conference, that he actually called you twice. So on the first call, what did he ask and what was your response?
I don't recall if it was both telephone calls, quite frankly. I did receive a call from him. And again, he said, Annette, you'd be extraordinarily qualified to take on this position, and talked a little bit about the role of STDC. And so then you gave it some consideration, and either you or he had another communication by phone, presumably to discuss whether or not what your decision was. Is that correct? Yes, I think that when I decided that I was going to apply, we had a conversation.
It's very interesting, and I believe that the testimony that you are giving right now is the truthful testimony, and I believe that the testimony reflects that Minister Bain's testimony was actually not truthful. That former Liberal Minister Baines, when he appeared, said that he never called anybody that wasn't on the list provided by PCO. So it's very clear that they called you first, then asked you to apply, then the PCO list came about those to be considered. And I believe, Mr. Chair, that that's something that's going to require reflection of this committee, that we had a former Minister of the Crown, I believe, that just lied before the committee about the appointment process and what was done. He said that very clearly, although many other things he couldn't remember, but he remembered that clearly, that he didn't do anything that somebody else didn't tell him to do, and that somebody else was the Prime Minister's department, the PCO. So that was actually a lie to this committee. Ms. Verschuren, when you took this position, which of course is not something that you do for pay, as we know, on government GIC appointments. The issue of the fact that NRStor, which you founded and owned, had already been doing business with SDTC, the Liberal Green Slush Fund. In fact, Leah Lawrence, who you inherited as the CEO, had warned Minister Bain's office and his former PMO staffer under Prime Minister Trudeau that was working on government and communications for SDTC also warned the minister's department that somebody who had a conflict should not be appointed. Ms. Lawrence testified before committee that you were the first chair appointed to this body that actually had been doing business with this body since it was founded in 2001. Why did you think, and I don't care about the ethics commissioner discussion, why did you think personally that it was okay for you to take on a job with a company, with an organization that was doing millions of dollars of business with NRStor, which you own?
Mr. Chair, during the application process, I declared this conflict. I had declared this conflict to the ethics commissioner, to the conflict commissioner, I said to everybody that that was responsible. I did not know that Ms. Lawrence approached and called the minister on this.
Thank you very much. That is your time, Mr. Perkins. Next is Ms. Bradford.
Now, multiple witnesses, including officials in the former Ministry of Industry, have stated it is customary for departments to send out mass emails to stakeholders once PCO post appointments openings. The department stated it likely sent out such an email. Given your history working with the Government of Canada, as you previously stated, and even serving more recently on the Clean Tech Strategy Table, do you remember receiving an email once the position was posted online around September 2018?
I honestly don't remember, Mr. Chair.
You don't recall whether you got such an email?
No.
Okay. If you don't recall, could you come back to the committee in writing with a response? Maybe check your notes and see?
Yes, I will.
Okay. The Ethics Commissioner has made it clear that this was a technical violation of the Act. How much would you have personally benefited from any of the funding that was approved by the board in which you had a conflict and did not recuse yourself? And what was your total stake in those approved projects?
Other than the project that I declared at the time of my chairmanship, I was not involved. I had no financial involvement in any project that came before SDTC.
And that is the time.
Ms. Verschuren, are you an investor in the Sandpiper Venture Capital Fund?
I am.
Sandpiper invests
in companies such as Denova or Connor Smith. Is that a fact?
Ces entreprises.
These businesses are a part of the Vercheron Center. Is that correct? And they also receive funds from the Vercheron Center.
Vercheron Center is a non-for-profit organization where the STDC provided funds to entrepreneurs or companies associated with that. And I don't recall these organizations during my tenure.
D'accord. Je vais reposer la question. Excusez-moi, je vais reposer.
I'm going to ask the question differently. Denova needed bioreactors and contributed some $500,000 in the bioreactors project. So it is a company associated with the Vercheron Center.
Yes, it is a company that, yes.
Donc, si je...
So if I've understood correctly, and I sum up, Ms. Verschuren, you have personal interest in a venture capital risk fund that invests in companies that are growing and that are also receiving public funding from the government, that is, whereas you have private interests in that Sandpiper investment fund. So when you say there was no financial connection with these companies that were being funded by the Vercheron Center, are you setting aside the possibility that was an indirect vector, that is, the Sandpiper fund?
I'd have to take a look back at the timing of when I invested in that Sandpiper fund. But I did check at the time, and there were no conflicts in the Sandpiper fund that STDC funded.
D'accord. Je parle de manière...
Very well, but I was talking in a more general way, not just STDC, because as you know, a conflict of interest could also be exercising certain authority, the fact of being the chairperson of a board. I'm sorry, I can't even hear myself speak. As I was saying, in the case of your chairing the board, you could have, through different vectors, obtain funds, and I will come back to this, obtain funds for different projects, be they projects like Denova, which are in your investment portfolio, because you invest in Sandpiper, and those companies are in Sandpiper's portfolio and indirectly in your personal portfolio. And I could come back to this. It was during the time you were chair of the board, and there was the bioreactor project, which was necessary, if I've understood, for the development of Nova. Precisely, that was in the Sandpiper portfolio. So the bioreactor project, you put in an application for SDTC, and I have the documents equivalent to $2.5 million. And obviously it was denied because of a big conflict of interest. But Mr. Durham asked all the members of the team to make every effort to find you some funding. So you received at the Vercheron Center for that project almost $11 million, and I have the details here with me. $2 million from, sorry, let me look. $2.5 million from Nova Scotia and $2 million from Andrew Nursworth, and also from Engine, totaling some $7 million. And then in 2023, $925,000 from Forestry Industry Transition Trust, also Nova Scotia government, and then another and $1.5 million for the Canadian Food Innovation Network, funded by the Strategic Innovation Fund. Your question, please. Now, your bioreactor project, for which you had indirect interest and got public funding, so you benefited from your friendship with Andrew Nosworthy and your position as chair of the board to enrich yourself and Sandpiper and enrich your personal interests.
I'll go back to the Vercheron Center is a non-for-profit eco-center that was sponsoring entrepreneurs and companies to grow their organizations. There was no investment by me personally, no investment at all directly or indirectly.
Through information received from the head of the appointment process at the PCO, Donalyn McClymont, we received certain information with respect to the process, the recruitment process, the actual hiring. So it would appear that applications were received by the PCO on the 12th of October 2018. 56 applicants had applied. The PCO interviewed 8 to March the 15th of 2019. Of those 8, 5 were recommended to be reviewed by Minister Baines at that time. However, none of those 5 passed whatever sort of threshold test Minister Baines had applied, because during that interim period, from October of 2018 to May 2nd, 2019, another 47 applicants had applied. It was shortlisted to 16. 3 were ultimately interviewed. You were part of that process. In fact, you had applied after your conversation or conversations with Minister Baines on April 30th, 2019. So a total of 6 recommendations were sent to Minister Baines. So now, with that timeline in place, as to the best of your recollection, when do you recall first receiving that phone call from Minister Baines? And if it wasn't from Minister Baines, was it from someone from his office? Explain that process to us, please.
Mr. Chair, I don't recall the date of when I received that phone call. I don't recall the date of that.
Applied on April the 30th, 2019. Was it the day before? Was it a week before? Was it a month before? Does that help you recollect? Your application was filed April 30th, 2019.
Yeah. I don't recall.
Okay. And was this just a cold call out of the blue? You picked up the phone rang, and hi there, Ms. Verschuren, this is Minister Baines. I have something to present to you. Was it something like that, or was there a process? Was there an email? Was there a letter that set up a specific time that he wanted to reach out to you? What can you recall about the process?
The process wasn't, it was probably, it was in the context of advice I was giving to him as part of his industry portfolio, and I think he did talk to me once outside of a telephone call, and I do not recall what he said at that time.
Well, it must have been flattering to you that he would consider you for this very important position. You clearly indicated you wanted some time to think about it. Was there more than one phone call from Minister Baines, again, highly recommending to you that you apply for this position? Was there more than once? Because I got the impression when you initially testified at a different committee that it was possibly up to 3 different phone calls, maybe 2 to 3 different phone calls, and that you ultimately made the decision to apply. Does that refresh your memory?
I think that there could have been a couple of occasions that he brought this up outside of a telephone call. I was involved with some events that he was at, and so, it was a general conversation.
I'm running out of time. I want to ask one last question.
Briefly.
Did you declare your conflict with respect to the SDTC during any of those conversations with Minister Baines before you filed your application, yes or no?
Mr. Chair, I don't recall talking specifically about that conflict, no.
Thank you very much.
So the commissioner indicated that in some cases you recused yourself and you should have abstained. Now you've recognized that. Now, if you were to begin over again, what would you do differently to ensure that you did indeed respect the Conflict of Interest Act?
I, of course, based upon the study done by the Ethics Commissioner, I accepted his recommendations, and I certainly would have recused instead of abstained from those projects. I did abstain in most of them. I just did not recuse myself, and so the procedure was set up in such a way that management recommended this, and so I followed that. But that was a mistake that I learned, and I would absolutely make sure I followed that precisely.
Ms. Verschuren, I would like to continue on the topic of the bioreactor. You filed a funding request for the bioreactor. And in your funding request to STDC for this bioreactor, we see that fundamentally it's a question of equipment, and the equipment's value is some $2.5 million. If you look at the project in total, including the electrical installation, the grand total of the project, and I have the figures before me, approximately $6 million. Nonetheless, when you look at the figures that the bioreactor received, and I mentioned these earlier, it's close to $11 million. Ms. Verschuren, what happened? What did you do with the $11 million of public money for a bioreactor, which only cost $6 million?
Mr. Chair, I did not apply for any monies for the Vercheron Center. The CEO did. I was not operating that organization. I was a board member, and so this is a matter associated with the existing organization.
Êtes-vous en train de dire que vous n'avez aucune...
Are you telling me that you had no say in what went on at the Vercheron Center that bears your name? Are you saying that you did not know what's going on at the Vercheron Center? Because that is problematic.
As a board member, absolutely, we were involved in the strategy of the organization and received budgets.
Donc, je vais reposer ma question très précise. Le projet de bioréacteur coûtait 6,5 millions de dollars. Le Centre Verschuren en a reçu.
The Vercheron Center got more than $11 million. What happened with the public taxpayers' money, Ms. Verschuren?
Vercheron Center is a non-for-profit organization, and it's funding the support of the ecosystem, and it is building these organizations to create commercial support in the ecosystems, and the organization is supporting a lot of companies.
Brièvement, s'il vous plaît.
Madame Verschuren, je suis vraiment abasourdie par l'absence de réponse.
I'm really shocked by the absence of response to a very simple and direct question, especially when you think that the Vercheron Center does not have any public annual reporting and receives public money. It's impossible for taxpayers to know where the money went. And I was expecting an answer from you. I'm disappointed that I did not get one.
Mr. Cooper, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Vercheron, the Auditor General's report found that the conflict of interest policy for directors at SDTC did not comply with the SDTC Act. Specifically, it did not comply with respect to Section 12.2 of the Act that states unequivocally that board members shall not profit or gain any income from the foundation. You were the chair of the board. Can you explain how the board adopted and maintained a conflict of interest policy that did not comply with the SDTC Act?
Mr. Chair, I believe that all office holders owe Canadians a commitment to accountability, and I've been accountable. I resigned as the board chair.
Ms. Verschuren, with the greatest respect, that was not my question. My question is, how is it that the SDTC board had a conflict of interest policy in place that didn't comply with the Act? And here's what this unlawful so-called conflict of interest policy allowed board members to do. And this is right from paragraph 6.46 of the Auditor General's report. Board members were allowed under the policy to buy or sell securities in companies who were funding recipients of SDTC as soon as 3 days after a public announcement of a funding decision. So how is that allowed to stand?
Mr. Chair, those were the procedures. Those are the procedures at the time. And I...
Mr. Sharon, here's the situation we have. The SDTC board could approve funding for a company on Monday, and then on Thursday, board members could buy or sell shares in that very same company. Do you know what that is? It's insider trading, isn't it?
Mr. Chair, those processes were in place when I arrived as chair, and so this was the recommendation.
They remained in place for 5 years. You were the chair, and for 5 years they remained in place, and you did nothing about it, did you? And Leah Lawrence, the CEO at the time, went to you and said the conflict of interest guidelines or policy as it pertains to the board need to be strengthened, and you kiboshed efforts to strengthen those conflict of interest policies to bring them in line with the Act and to end the insider trading. Isn't that right?
I followed what I believed and recommended by independent legal advice.
Is that the independent legal advice of the conflicted Ed Vandenberg? Is that the legal advice that you received? Is that your excuse?
And from the management team. That was the way in which
it's very interesting because at SDTC, there was a conflict of interest policy for staff. Staff, quite appropriately, were prohibited from investing in a company funded by SDTC for 5 years following a project's completion. 5 years. And yet board members could invest in companies 3 days after a public announcement of a funding decision was made. How do you explain that?
Mr. Chair, the procedures were those that I followed. And
those were ones that facilitated insider trading. And you know what the explanation is? That the board that you chaired was corrupt from top to bottom. And by the way, Ms. Verschuren, you've sat as a director on publicly traded companies, haven't you?
Yes, I have.
And you know full well that pursuant to the rules on insider trading and self-dealing from the Ontario Securities Commission, that directors can't purchase shares in the company in which they sit as a director on within days of a public announcement. You know that you can't do that, right?
Mr. Chair, I believe that
I asked you, you know that that's not the case. You can't do that.
Mr. Cooper, your time is up. I'm going to allow the witness to answer. So, Ms. Verschuren, you have the floor.
Certainly the procedures were established when I got there and continued.
One big green gravy tray.
I'm going to move on now. Ms. Yip, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Verschuren, for coming today. Would you like to finish answering the question?
No, I think it's not necessary. I think I have tried to establish.
She's admitted her guilt.
Okay,
Mr. Cooper, your time is up. Yes, Ms. Yip, you have the floor.
Ms. Vercheron, do you know who Andrew Noseworthy is?
Yes, I know who Andrew Noseworthy is.
So earlier this week, we had former Deputy Minister Newbley here, who used the phrase that Andrew Noseworthy was his, quote, eyes and ears on the SDTC board. Would you agree with that assessment of Mr. Noseworthy, that he was the eyes and ears of the industry department on the SDTC board?
I would agree with that assessment.
Okay. So my understanding is that Mr. Noseworthy attended nearly all, if not all, SDTC meetings. Is that your understanding as well? Was he at nearly all such meetings?
Yes, Mr. Chair, he was at, I would say, most meetings.
Okay.
Most board of directors meetings, yes.
Okay. So we've established that he was the eyes and ears of the department. He was sent there specifically by the Deputy Minister to be the eyes and ears. So now I'm curious, what was the role he actually played in those meetings? Did he at any point make note of the fact that there were problems with the conflict of interest? Did he raise any concerns about recusals versus abstentions? What was he saying at those meetings?
He participated I would often ask him to talk about ISID's direction and his response to the performance of STTC.
So he was. Sorry, go ahead.
So he never questioned the. He never questioned the procedures at the board level.
Okay, so we established that Mr. Noseworthy did not make note of the conflicts of interest or raise those issues. But I want to follow up. So he was basically providing the SDTC board with the direction from Industry Canada, what Industry Canada wished to see at SDTC. Is that my understanding?
He was, obviously, Mr. Noseworthy was the representative of ISID, and it was important to, have that relationship between ISID and the board of directors and management. And he would work with the CEO often to talk about, new ideas or initiatives that SDTC may have.
Okay. In the time since you've left the board, have you had any further contact with ADM Noseworthy?
I have not.
Okay. I want to go back to the selection process. Our understanding is that you applied to be the chair on April 30th of 2019, and I think we've established that prior to that, you had received at least one, sounds like two phone calls from Minister Baines and perhaps other discussions with the former minister at perhaps public events or receptions of some sort. When you applied, were you aware that the Privy Council office had determined, and I'm reading this from Privy Council office, quote, The committee agreed that all 7 individuals are strong and that they also represented unique strengths that could serve the interests, current needs, and future direction of the SDTC. So that's referring to the highly qualified individuals that had applied prior to those phone calls. Were you aware that there were other individuals at that time who were deemed to be, quote, highly qualified for the position of chair and for positions on the board?
Mr. Chair, as I indicated, I did not look for this position, but when, and I was approached, after reflection, I did apply for that. I had no knowledge of who the other applicants were. I had no knowledge, quite frankly, of the process itself.
Sure. Thank you. Did the minister at any point note why specifically you were being encouraged?
I think the minister recognized my business experience, my focus and interest in the clean technology area that I had committed to push this industry forward in everything I did.
And that is your time, Mr. Nader.
There's some kind of corruption at issue that you are self-dealing. Now, you have acknowledged, and the ethics commissioner has found 2 ethics violations. One in relation to the failure to recuse. You abstained, but you failed to recuse yourself in relation to the Vercheron Center. Of course, though, there was no pecuniary interest, so there's no self-dealing, there's no financial interest on that front. On the second front, there was the blanket COVID payment. Yes. And so there was an improper decision there as well on the basis, though, as I understand it, of incorrect legal advice that you were relying upon corporate counsel. Is there any other instance that I should know about, that this committee should know about, that the Canadian public should know about, where you have financially benefited from decisions made at SDTC that you involved yourself in?
I have not benefited financially, and I think that the ethic, as I stated in another appearances, I accept the findings of the ethics commissioner. I really do, and he accepts that I properly sought legal advice, guidance to ensure my compliance, and what he saw is that at the time
you should have had a better lawyer. You should have had a better lawyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am going to follow up on the questions of my previous 2 colleagues from the Bloc and the NDP, but I would like to follow up on something I asked you earlier. In the timeline on your appointment, when you sought advice from the ethics commissioner on your conflict of interest in assuming this position, the conflict of interest being that the board that you were about to chair of the organization that was already lending or granting money to your company, was that after you had accepted the position in your conversations with Minister Baines?
I believe it was done absolutely before I was appointed, and it was done. It was done in I think it was a few days before.
You applied. Somewhere in that neighborhood you applied,
yeah.
But after okay. I'd like to follow up on the questions. So you sat on the board of the Vercheron Center, and did you sit on the board of Sandpiper as well?
No, I did not.
Okay, but you are an investor in Sandpiper, and you sit on the board of the Vercheron Center, did at the time?
That's correct.
At the time you were chairing the SDTC board. Correct?
I'm trying to remember when I became an investor in Sandpiper, but...
Okay, I'll come back to that. So the Vercheron Center sought $6.8 million from SDTC, and they did that without consulting the board of the Vercheron Center? Because when I look at the cash flow statements and the income statement of the Vercheron Center from the time, it appears that it was in desperate need of this money.
I declared conflicts at the board of the Vercheron Center on anything to do with SDTC.
That wasn't my question, though. It did go through the board. So when it went to the board investment committee on January 13th, the minutes, January 13th, 2020, 22. The minutes rejected it, as you say, for all the reasons of conflict of interest. And the minutes say that SDTC would shift its efforts in discussion with other potential funding sources and hope that the diligence conducted to date can be transformed into another funding agency. And that was in January. And in June, ACOA gave the Vercheron Center $2 million. And so on. For the next couple of months, another $4.2 million was given by other government agencies, another $1 million in September by ACOA, another $3.1 million by ISED, which Mr. Noseworthy acted for, and also another $1.4 million from DFO in May of that year. So do you believe it was ethical to use the staff of SDTC to be the business development funding officers for the Vercheron Center that you sat on the board of, on both, that you used the staff of your own agency that you chaired to help fund government money in other ways for the other organization you established and sat on the board of?
Mr. Chair, the Vercheron Center is a non-for-profit organization. Any funding goes to support the ecosystem and its company.
That wasn't my question. You chaired an organization that used its staff to find other government money when it was conflicted and you couldn't get money out of the thing that you chaired, the Green Slush Fund. So you used the staff to find money from other government departments who then ended up giving the Vercheron Center not $6.8 million, but $11 million. To me, that's a total abuse of your position, just for MP from Erskine Smith's information. He doesn't seem to think that's a problem. And then that center,
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
The Vercheron Center then invested...
Point of order, Mr.
Just
Chair.
1 second, Mr. Perkins. Yes, Ms.
Absolutely uncalled for. Taking shots
Ms. Khalid, that's not a point of order. And
no,
that's,
it is.
By the standards of this committee, that's a pretty light poke.
Point of order.
So,
Point of order.
Yes, Mr. Erskine Smith, your poke at a Conservative member was quite a lot harder than that, but I'll hear your point of order. Go ahead, please.
Well, it's actually not, Chair, because he's suggesting that I don't care about an ethics violation when I've multiple times that I do.
The meeting's been going exceptionally well. No, Ms. Brooks said this is not a point of order. And there is a Liberal member up next, and if you feel the need to rebut what Mr. Perkins and anyone else is saying, you're free to do that. But these are not points of order. These are light pokes I'm hearing from all sides, and they're certainly well within.
I understand, Chair, but I'm on record saying I don't approve of ethics violations, and Mr. Cooper's on record saying he doesn't understand insider trading.
You made your position clear in your turn, and if you like another turn, you're welcome to speak to your whip. But these are points of debate, not points of order. Mr. Perkins, you've got about 30 seconds left.
So as a board of SDTC, you used the staff to find funding for the Vercheron Center, which you couldn't get from SDTC. You got twice as much from the government as you asked for. And then that center invested in an organization that you have a financial interest in, Sandpiper, Denova, and the Bio Creators. So there is a clear link between your efforts to get money for the failed Vercheron Center, get that so that they could give money to a company you had a financial interest in. That's a direct conflict of interest, and it's personal benefit by you, which is what the minister set up when he appointed you and knew and was warned that you had conflicts of interest.
Mr. Verschuren, I assume you have no
comment.
That's fine. That's fine.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Verschuren, going back to the appointment process, when you finally made the decision to make application after you spoke a number of times with former Liberal Minister Baines, did you actually reach out to him personally to confirm you had made the decision and you would be applying?
I'm not, Mr. Chair, I'm not sure whether I confirmed with him or one of his colleagues.
Okay, but at least when you say colleagues, you mean a member of his office, correct?
Yeah, yes.
Okay,
correct.
so there was a confirmation to his office before you made a formal application, correct?
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
Unlike other worthy candidates, your appointment as chair of SDTC was definitely initiated through the PMO. Who in the Prime Minister's office did you speak with prior to your interview with the PCO?
Mr. Chair, I do not recall talking to anybody in the PMO's office.
Ever?
PCO's office.
Ever during the process?
I do not recall, no.
Okay. Do you recall the actual interview with the PCO?
I do.
Who interviewed
recall-
you?
I don't recall, but I can get back to you.
Okay. Prior to your resignation as chair in December of 23, did anyone from the PCO, the PMO, or the current minister's office or any other department official advise you against resigning?
Mr. Chair, no one advised me against resigning.
Okay. When I had the privilege of meeting with you at one of the other committee meetings for the first time, I recall how strongly against you were in terms of any sort of pushback from members to impugn your character, to impugn your integrity, and you were very defiant that there'd be absolutely no grounds by which you would resign. Ultimately, you did make that decision to resign. The allegations that you claimed were out there were simply allegations. Now they've been proven by the Ethics Commissioner. You have been found guilty by the Ethics Commissioner on 2 occasions. So why did you resign?
Mr. Chair, there was a lot of stress in the organization, a lot of stress with respect to, what was happening there at the time. And I was putting perhaps undue pressure on that.
Okay.
The CEO.
Thank you. Since your resignation, have you had any discussions with the Prime Minister's office, the Privy Council office, or Industry Canada about which documents related to your tenure at SDTC would be withheld from Parliament?
I've not had any conversations on that matter.
Okay. Have you had any input from current board members at SDTC about your tenure in which documents would either not be released or fully redacted or partially redacted from the view of parliamentarians?
Mr. Chair, had no conversation with anybody about withholding any documents.
You clearly are keeping abreast of what's happening here in Parliament. Parliament has been literally shut down because of the government's refusal to hand over unredacted documents, all unredacted documents pursuant to the order of the Speaker of the House. Do you believe, and the evidence clearly has shown, that the government has chosen to supply us with thousands and thousands of pages of full redactions? Do you, as a former chair of the SDTC, believe that the redactions are an effort to shield the former and current minister from being held accountable?
Mr. Chair, that's something that I cannot comment on.
Because you don't have an answer or you don't feel comfortable?
Mr. Chair, I disclosed all my documentation to SDTC, to the Ethics Commissioner, to the Auditor General.
Okay.
And
why, and these were unredacted documents that you supplied?
Correct.
Mr. Brock, I'm afraid that is the time. I know your side will have one more opportunity.
So I'm trying to make sense of Mr. Perkins' last round here. He says you went to SDTC for money for the Vercheron Center. You said it wasn't you, but regardless, collectively, the organization came to look for money. And the so-called green slush fund wasn't enough of a slush fund, so you couldn't get the money. So now you went somewhere else to get the money. And now I'm supposed to be concerned about that. Why am I concerned about the Vercheron Center getting money from ISED, not via STTC?
It's hard to comment on that.
Yeah, it's hard to figure that one out. And Mr. Perkins, why I get so frustrated when you engage in character assassination is, frankly, I just thought you were better. And here we have a situation where Jenny Burns looking over your shoulder, and you're acting entirely differently from the person that I expected. I thought I was going to work alongside at this committee, and yet, here we are.
You have a minute left, Mr. Erskine-Smith.
I've said all I need to say, Chair.
Mr. Cooper, you're up for 5 minutes, please.
Mr. Chair, despite Mr. Erskine-Smith's profound ignorance of the rules of the Ontario Securities Commission, Ms. Verschuren, as someone who served as a director on publicly traded companies, you will be aware that under the rules relating to insider trading and self-dealing, directors cannot buy and sell shares in the company days after a public announcement. Rather, they can only do so during limited windows outside of the quarterly financial reporting periods. And yet, the conflict of interest rules for the SDTC board, which violated the Act, allowed board members to buy and sell securities within 3 days of a funding announcement. I ask you again, why didn't you fix the policy? Because it sure sounds like a good deal for board members.
Mr. Chair, again, I followed the procedures that were established at the time that I joined that board, reviewing these things were the responsibility of management and
so you take no responsibility. Now, I'll ask you this. What constituted a public announcement? Was it just a press release posted on the SDTC website? Is that a public announcement?
Mr. Chair, I don't recall.
Yeah. Well, if Mr. Erskine-Smith wants to dispute whether it's technically insider trading or akin to insider trading, it certainly is a racket, it certainly is corruption, and it certainly is a very different standard than the 5 years that staff members at SDTC had to wait before they could do what you permitted yourself to do as a member of the SDTC board. But speaking of law breaking during the time that you were the chair of the SDTC board, your fellow board member, Andre-Lise Matteau, admitted when she appeared before this committee, Ms. Matteau being a very close friend of the Minister of the Environment, Stephen Guilbeault, that the board funneled $10.4 million from SDTC to companies that she had interests in through her investment firm, Cycle Capital. How did you allow that to happen?
Again, Mr. Chair, this was part of the decision-making process in terms of the COVID payments, and
Ms. Verschuren, $10.4 million went into companies that Ms. Matteau had an interest in, and these were not COVID-related payments. Ms. Matteau left the room, in fact, when the monies went out the door, but 12.2 of the Act states very clearly, no director shall profit or gain any income or acquire any property from the foundation or its activities. The Act wasn't complied with, just as the conflict of interest policy that you had in place didn't comply with that section of the Act. So again, I put it to you, how did you allow $10.4 million unlawfully to be funneled into Andre Lise-Matteau's companies?
Mr. Chair, the process was the presentations were made to the Project Review Committee. The Project Review Committee would recommend putting them forward. This was a process that I believe was the same as before I was the chair. So I think it was.
Well, Ms. Verschuren, 12.2 of the Act is pretty clear. I just read it to you. What part of that did you not understand?
Go ahead, Mr. Cooper, ask again.
I asked,
I'll give you time, ask again.
I said Section 12.2 of the Act is clear. I read it to you. What part of it did you not understand when $10.4 million was funneled into Andre Lise-Matteau's companies while you were the chair and sat on the board?
As chair,
You have bothered to have acquainted yourself with a very fundamental component of the Act.
Mr. Chair, I certainly recognize, as chair, I felt that I was following all the policies and procedures and conflicts of interest associated with STDC.
Well, policies and procedures. Ed Vandenberg, who was providing you counsel, was also being remunerated while he served as a member of the STDC Council, and while you were the chair, he was voting to appoint 5 members to the board that you were the chair of an improperly constituted council. Did you ask any questions about that?
Mr. Vandenberg provided legal advice and provided service to the STDC board and to management. And
he was making unlawful appointments to the board while you were the chair. And you just didn't care? You just turned a blind eye to that too? You know, it's conflicts of interest, it's unlawful appointments, it's self-dealing,
Mr. Cooper,
akin to insider trading.
That is your time, Mr. Cooper.
On and on and on it goes.
Mr. Cooper, that is your time.